All right, here we have a page of notes we're going to use for the second day of lesson 1-1 and any day after that. You can refer to these notes here. Let me highlight real numbers. We are going to be applying lots of properties and rules, and we'll be using real numbers as we work through Algebra 2. So you might ask, what are real numbers? And they're included. All these sets are included in the sets of real numbers, starting with natural numbers, which what you started counting with back in the day, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, etc. Then somebody threw 0 in there. Now that makes the set of whole numbers, which are all the natural numbers, and 0. Then you have integers. You include all the opposites of the whole numbers, and the whole numbers together makes all the integers. Now you throw in fractions. All numbers that can be expressed in the form of m over n, where m and n are integers, and the denominator is not 0, n is not 0. Those are called rational numbers. There's also irrational numbers in which the decimals do not end or repeat. They're called non-terminating, non-repeating. Pi is a great example of irrational. So all together, they make the set of real numbers. And those are the numbers we'll be using. You might say, well, isn't that it? Are there any other such numbers in the world other than just real numbers? And the answer is yes, there are things called imaginary numbers. And if we get the chances here, we'll touch on those a little bit, but that'll be something you can do in Algebra 3 or pre-calculus or something like that. Okay? So those are the numbers. Now, you might have seen Venn diagrams before where natural numbers is what you started with, natural numbers. Then you threw in 0, so then you have the whole numbers, which include all the natural numbers. So now we have the whole numbers. But then you throw in the opposites, the negative 4s, the negative 20s, the negative 30s, and all the whole numbers. So you have a bigger set of numbers, which would be the integers, which includes all the whole and natural numbers. And then you throw in fractions and decimals, that decimals either end or repeat. And now you have the entire set called the rational, R-A-T, the rat numbers, rational. And then you have the set of irrational, they usually abbreviate A-T, the irrational numbers, such as pi and the square root of 5. Those are all irrational. But when you put those two sets of numbers together, rational and irrational, you get the real numbers. The other thing on this set of notes that we have that you can go back and look at any time are the properties. These are properties you've been using for years. Properties such as commutative, associative, identity, inverse, and distributive. So these are the properties you need to be familiar with in algebra, for Algebra 1, but now in Algebra 2. Remember, the commutative property is when you can switch the order. A plus B or B plus A is the same answer. Also works for multiplication. Then you go to the associative property. That's when the order stays the same, but the grouping has changed. That works for addition, also works for multiplication. If you change the grouping, like we add 3 things together, you can add the first 2 together or the last 2 together first. Gives you the same answer. Same with multiplication. Then we will move on to the identity property. If you add 0, you get A. And then multiplication, if you multiply 1, you still get the same number. And then we have the inverse operation, which means we call them additive inverses or opposites. If you take a number and add its opposite to it, you will get 0. And in multiplication, it's called a multiplicative inverse or reciprocal. So if you have a number A and you multiply by its reciprocal, you will always get a 1. And then we have the distributive property. And this is when you have addition and multiplication where the addition's inside, which also could be subtraction, and you're multiplying a times that, you distribute. Let me get my pen tool. If you remember, let me zoom in too, see if I can zoom it in. The a you distribute to the b and get ab, and the a times the c, you get a times c. Then you add those results together if you can, if they're like terms. So those are the properties and a quick review of what real numbers are.